Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of our video series on this Cadillac DTS. What are we going to be doing in this episode, Ed?
Well, in this episode we're going to be mostly doing reassembly of the engine.
It's true.
We get to use this special tool, and
use it correctly.
Yeah. And then we're going to be mating the engine with the transmission in the cradle, so that'll be fun.
Yep. Only good times to be had. Enjoy the drive.
Alright, so what I'm doing right now is I'm going through and I'm cleaning up all this crap off the gasket surface here. So we can have a nice clean seal when we put this all back together. So what I'm using is just some Scotch-Brite and some brake clean just to clean this up and, you know, just scuff the surface down and just take all this stuff off. It's probably going to take a little while. Just to get this all nice and clean, so we'll see what happens. So this, we've gotten the bottom sealing surface pretty nicely clean. So this right here is just the, this is actually the bottom of the cam cover. So just, you know, lightly scuffing the gasket material off of this while we have it, you know, nice and easy to get to and easy to clean out, and might as well just, you know, lightly clean this up. Be able to get most of the old gasket material off of it. Looks pretty good. Alright, so this is actually the oil pan side facing area. Between this Halfcase piece and the oil pan, there's another, it's called like an oil manifold plate that goes between this. It's this, the oil manifold plate, the windage tray, and then the oil pan. You can see actually from the remnants of the gasket that we have an outer seal around here, right? And this basically seals the outside of the block from the oil, and it also keeps, you'll see these 6 holes here. These are the oil drain backs from the cylinder heads. So the oil's coming down here and then going into the oil pan. And then you have an inner seal, which you'll notice is all around this area here. So what you actually have here is this area is the oil pickup from the oil pan. So it goes through here, through the pump, forces its way through here, through the filter, and then from here, through the filter, into here, and then through all of these to oil the rest of the engine. Okay, so now that we've got our Halfcase all cleaned up, we're gonna first basically suck out all the oil from every one of these bolt holes here, and that's so we can install this stud kit from Northstar Performance. It's just a lot better than using bolts on this thing. We broke one when we got it out of here. I had a welder come and he was able to actually extract it from that hole there, but this will allow us to just drive each one of these studs in here, and then you use these bolts, or nuts I should say, to secure the whole thing down when you torque it. That stops you from, if we ever have to take this motor apart again, please, oh God, no, but if we ever have to take it apart again, we won't damage the threads in the block at all, you know, potentially, by removing the bolts. All you have to do is loosen the nuts and the studs stay right where they are. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and install our studs into the block. If you'll notice, I'm starting with this one. This is number 11 on the tightening sequence, but this is the slightly longer stud because this is where your oil pickup tube attaches to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive this down. Just screw it in all the way till it stops. Now if you get some oil that comes out, you may have to back this out and clean it out a couple of times before you can get it to seat down all the way, because the oil will obviously jam up the threads and keep you from screwing it all the way in. Alright, so these go with this tapered end up. So, and you'll see there's some oil squeezing out of here. So we're gonna take this out again, clean the threads, clean up any oil here. You may have to use 2 nuts together in order to secure these in all the way. But if they all seat about the same depth, then alright, so there are a couple of threads here, a couple of holes. Where the threads are, there's some junk in them. So I have an M10 1.5 tap here. I'm just going to go down and, you know, kind of make sure these threads are good. So far so good. No hard crunching or anything, so this is basically just to clear them out so we can get the studs in here. This one in particular was the one with the bad broken bolt, so alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put a little bit of RTB silicone. This is the ultra gray stuff from Permatex, into the channel here. Just a little bit. Fill each channel, and then we're going to put these Velcro gaskets in place over top of that, just to act as an extra layer of seal. I have it cut to a very small hole, so hopefully we're not going to put a shitload in there. So here we go. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use some assembly lube to lubricate these bearing shells here before we put the half case back on the engine there. So just going to put a bunch of it in here, smear it around. Much, but I'd rather have too much than not enough. Some extra assembly lube on the crankshaft surface here, on each of the main bearings that are exposed. Alright, so we have our half case here, we have our bearings lubricated. We have the bearing shells lubricated. Now we're going to flip this over and put it through the studs on top of the top half of the block here. So, I'm going to go like this. And hopefully all these studs line up. Okay. We might have to give this a few taps just to get it past these dowel pins, but okay, so we're just gonna give this a couple of little taps. Till we ground out on the block. What was that?
I think it was an acorn.
Great. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and torque all the outside bolts. There's 8 of them on the half case here. I'm just going to use the automatic ratchet just to get them down. Not tighten them, but then I'll use the torque wrench. But they're supposed to be torqued to 22 foot-pounds, and I'm going to go in like a crisscrossing. Okay, so we have our torque wrench set to 22 foot-pounds, and we're just gonna tighten the rest of these up until it clicks. So what we have here is the oil manifold plate. When you're doing one of these engines, you've got to get a new one of these. They don't make any gaskets for this stuff. You know, just to put back in here, this is all like it's a pre-made factory thing. We tried to get the Rock Auto aftermarket one that they sold by like Mahler or whatever, and it didn't fit the dowel pins here. It didn't fit. So this is the actual GM part. You can get it from the dealer. It's a little bit over $100, but you need it because the new one, there's no way to like remake this seal. You can try like using RTV or something, but it's just not worth it to do all this work and then not replace this piece. This guy just goes on top here, like so. And then the windage tray here goes on there. Okay, so we're going to be torquing all these nuts here on top of the studs. And there is a specific order in which we have to do it from the factory manual. First go around with this Northstar Performance stud kit, we're going to do 30 foot-pounds. And then the next go around we're going to do 38. And then we're going to test to make sure the crankshaft still rotates properly. Next round, 38 foot-pounds. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in these little securing bolts for the oil manifold pan here. They're 10mm, there's 10 of them. I'm just going to go as close to the bottom as I dare with the automatic one to save some time, and then we'll torque them up to 89 inch-pounds. As you can see, we have all of our studs in this side. They're not thread locked in place, but everything's lined up. The head gasket fits fine. We didn't really have to drive any of them in with the nuts put together, like, you know, jamming the nuts like this, except for this one. For some reason, this one's very stiff when it goes in. This one's aligned perfectly. This one, it's close, but. Alright, so I just wanted to go over this Northstar Performance Kit with everybody after we've done this this side here. It comes with this nifty little X jig here that you use to, here's the smooth hole that your drill bit goes through. Here's the threaded hole that your tap goes into. So the drill bit will pass through this hole, and then you drill it out, and then your tap goes through this one, and that centers it perfectly in here. You go all the way down till the mark on the end of this tap. We basically made our own mark because the mark that was given here is a bit, I think is a bit too deep. I'm not really sure what the point of having these studs plunge that far into the block is. I don't really know, because if you're setting this shoulder a 1/16 of an inch, like the instructions say, below the deck surface, I don't really see the point in tapping all the way down to here. I'd rather have this, you know, hit the edge of the threads where it should be and not just keep going. So maybe some other people have some opinions on that. I have no idea, but that's what we've been doing. We made our own little mark on the tap here just to know where to stop. But the X-brace comes with these bolts. You start out by using these guys first. This is the M11 thread for the original head bolts, and they act as your alignment because these big shoulders here fit into the larger smooth ports like that. They act as your alignment, and your shorter one, your longer one goes on the bottom, your shorter one goes on the top. And you spin these guys in here. First couple of these, you may end up in a situation where you're going to have to use some air to clean out all the junk from the threads in there, because as you back the original head bolts out, as you can see, you know, there's usually a bunch of garbage that comes out of there. The factory put like a compound on these threads, so that's in the threads, and then plus the aluminum corrosion and whatever is in there, so you gotta deal with that. But the head size on these is 24 millimeter, and you just turn this in until it's nice and tight. Gonna go anywhere. I like to start out with these holes first, because they're the easier ones to drill. This is typically where the dowel pin is located, which looks like this, and you'll see that this bolt, or this stud, is machined into it as the dowel pin. So when you're actually going in here, getting this perfectly centered is slightly tricky. So when you're starting out doing this, I would definitely recommend trying one of these holes first, then doing the one that has the pin in it, because you have to go a bit deeper with the drill, and I'd get comfortable doing these holes first, then do these pins. It's the same deal with the bottom. The long ones go on top, as you can see, short ones on the bottom. We're going to be fitting, once we're done with all this, we're going to be test fitting the cylinder head. We're going to probably put a jack underneath this just to level the block, and then we're going to put the level across the top of these guys, make sure all of them are level, and then we're going to put the cylinder head down on top of it with the head gasket in place to make sure that our threads stick out far enough above the cylinder head so that when we tighten them down, we're not going to have any problems. I know the instructions say one thing, but I just want to verify everything before I thread lock these studs in place. All right, we're gonna get started drilling the top of this again. So we'll go here. We'll go through this one, maybe we'll do this one, then we'll go back to this one. It's important to note that you want to let your drill bit do all the work. You'll probably notice me hang up a couple of times when you plunge into this adapter here. You just want to, you have to have a very light touch with this thing because the drill bit is very sharp. The instructions say you can dull the edge here with a file. I've just been using a very light touch going in there, and if it stops for any reason, I back it up and just keep going lightly, and it seems to work fine. With this kit, the instructions say no WD-40 on the drill bit. If you're familiar with the time circuit, you've ever done that before, it says to use cutting fluid, i.e. WD-40 on the drill bit, but you know, we're just following the directions as given, so there you go. Okay, so you'll notice that there's a little bit of wiggle room here. You want to hold the drill as straight as possible and just kind of bore this hole out. You want to get it turning first, and you'll see what happens. Alright, so what I'm gonna have to do here is basically take my Dremel and try and sand out this dowel pin hole. Unfortunately, somebody was drunk at the factory, I think, and they didn't drill the hole straight through the dowel pin. It was slightly off, but that didn't matter when you were using a head bolt that was very narrow. Since the threads here are 5/6, 5/8, when you're putting this in here, this shoulder is not going down in there because it keeps binding up on the lip here and the threads that were cut into it. So I'm just going to try and sand this back a little bit, and then we're going to try and put that thing, put it back in, and we may have to do this a couple of times just to shave just enough off to get it to go in there, but we'll see what happens. Alright, so what we did here, we put one of our cylinder heads on, and that was basically to double check. I mean, we had as you saw, we had these head gasket on it. But what we're doing now is just to double check that the cylinder head goes on. The dowel pins are in alignment, and we have enough of the threaded studs sticking through the 10 holes here, so that when we actually go to put the bolts on it and the nuts, or sorry, the washers and the nuts, that it's gonna actually clamp it and not, you know, just be there for show. So I guess the next step is basically we're gonna thread lock the studs in place. We're gonna do a bit more cleanup on the cylinder head here because a few of the gasket mating surfaces are still a bit dirty. I gotta go around the edge here for the valve covers, make sure that's nicely cleaned up. Clean up any of the random gunk that's inside the passageways here. Just clean the whole head in general, and then we can actually torque it down. And then we'll obviously get a new head gasket if we have it inside, but we'll just have to play it by ear, so we'll see what happens. Alright, so we're basically just trying to get the stud depth set evenly on all of these. I'm not sure that it matters a whole lot because there's a little bit of a wiggle. We're trying to get it as accurate as possible. So what we've established is by using the block here at the base, we can see that the bubble level here is just a tick over this mark here. So we know that the engine that's our sort of level on the engine. What we were doing is we were twisting these two outer ones, which have the alignment dowels on them, in to the point that we get this thing lined up. Now it's not perfectly level as you can see, but it's very close. And the plan was, once we get these two in pretty level, I think what I'm going to do is before I take this out, I'm going to make a mark there on each one of these so I know approximately where we're going to drive it down to. But this is approximately it. We're going to mark these with a Sharpie, going to back them back out, and then these guys I'll try and mark as well, right about where they are. See, I'm just moving them out until they lightly tap this level, so that we're all about the same height. I'm going to mark that. Mark this in a couple of places, just so you can see it. So hopefully get these back set to the same depth. Alright, so now I'm going to apply the thread locker to this stud here. Add some to the last few threads. So that's what I'm going to do. Looks like we got all our the top row thread locked in place. I'll wipe that off in a second. But our lever was good across all the studs. So next step is just get these nuts loose. And, we'll work on the bottom row. Alright, as you can see, we're actually going uphill all the way here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these in so they're off this, right? Then we're going to adjust these two guys until we're approximately level with the whole system here. So I'm going to turn him in a little bit, and I am wrong. I pushed this one way too far in. Now, we have this set here. This needs to be a little bit lower. Yeah, roughly about there, I think, right? Maybe a little more. So, that means these guys are level with one another, which is level with the block. So now we're just gonna bump these up against this. Oops. Okay. Okay, now we're just gonna quickly inspect all of the areas here. And you'll notice that we have a good countersink on all of these guys. So the biggest problem that we would have here is if one of these studs is sticking up above the deck surface, it's going to pinch the head gasket. It's not going to seal. So we want it definitely below here. Now, this looks good. I think what we're going to do now is basically do the exact same thing we did on the top layer and make our marks on these guys on the block. And that we should be able to just take them out, put them back in. Alright, so there we go. We're looking at the bubble level here, and we're got all 5 of these nicely even. So the next step will be get rid of these nuts. And we're going to clean this cylinder head up here. We basically got to do some work on the intake plenum here, some work on the exhaust side, and we just got to get all the crud off the valve cover mating surface here. One of the things I noticed on this is the rear cylinder head, and this is its exhaust manifold. This is the EGR passage here, and there are 4 little runners. 1, 2, 3, 4, and those are plumbed down into the exhaust valve here, and that feeds the EGR passages here, which then gets pumped through through a valve and into the intake to get burned. Now, on this motor, I mean, this whole thing was almost plugged up solid. You can kind of see, I haven't cleaned the exhaust manifold yet. You can see how much carbon is built up in here. But if you're doing one of these engines, make sure to rod this whole passage out. I still haven't done this. Rod this out with a wire brush, clean all of this out of here, and then do the same thing here. You may have to use a pick if it's gotten hard and disgusting. It probably has. Yeah, that will get rid of it, but you want to make sure this is nicely unclogged so your EGR system is working properly. We're probably going to have to do that with the other cylinder head. I haven't looked at that one yet, but this is a reminder to take your Northstar out and beat on it every once in a while. So we're back. We have all of our studs thread locked. They're all nice and level. We've put our head gaskets on. Our next step is basically to put both cylinder heads on, and then we're going to begin the tightening sequence of each cylinder head. So we're going to it goes in a sequence of basically 3 steps. You'll go from if you look at the little diagram they give you in the book here, or in the piece of paper, the kit. They go 30, 60, and 75, but according to their website's instructions, for the shiny studs you go to 80. As you can see here, this is the tightening sequence that you go through on tightening each of the bolts. Now we'll show that as we're doing it, but I just wanted to have this diagram there so you can see it. Okay, so the instructions say to put the rounded edge up, facing out. So these are a bit tricky to see this because they look very similar, but if you can see here, this is the flat side that goes against the cylinder head, and this is the round side. It's a bit more finished, a bit more machined here. There's a little bit of a lip, you can see it around the edge, and this you can kind of feel the difference between this side and that side with your fingers. So this is the curved side, this goes like that. There it is. Okay, looks good. We're going to put on our, these are 11/16 hex, and we're going to put them on our studs. So I'm going to spin them down, and then we're going to begin tightening them. So we have all of our nuts seated against the washers on our studs here, so we're ready to begin the tightening sequence. So our first one is here. Our first torque setting is 30 foot-pounds. Alright, so if you remember from earlier part of the video, we took these 3 little bolts out of the side here. And I put 2 of them back in already. This is the 3rd one. They're 10mm. And these get torqued down to about 106 inch-pounds, according to the manual. So that's our next step here. Bam. Alright, so we've put our oil pickup tube on here. Again, it's the torque on this bolt is the same as the rest of the outside bolts here on the oil manifold plate. That's 89 inch-pounds. And then this nut here that secures this to the stud is 18 foot-pounds. So that's all in place. Our next step is to put the oil pan back on it. So we've already double checked that our sensor is fully functional and oriented in the right position. We've put a new Felpro gasket in here. Now all that's really left to do is flip this guy over and put it on top. So this guy goes down on here. There are no alignment dowels or anything else for this. You just have to make sure the bolts are lined up. So there's 13 bolts in total on this oil pan. Okay, so once we've got all our bolts just finger tight all the way around, now we're gonna go in sequence tighten up all these bolts, all 13 bolts around here. So here's number 1. Okay, so here we are installing the timing chain guide. On this side of the engine is actually on the lower half of the timing chain. You'll notice the timing chain shoe above it, which is we already installed prior to shooting this, but these are 10mm bolts that I'm just threading into the timing chain guide here to seat it. Now we're going to be threading the chain down through. You'll see we slip it over the inner gear on the intermediate shaft there, and we'll bring it over, around, and then up over the timing chain guide. Make sure it's centered in the shoe, and then once we get it up there, now we'll have to put our sprockets in place. Alright, so here we are putting the intake side sprocket on. We still have the camshaft holder in place, and we're just kind of sort of fitting it here to make sure that everything lines up and we don't have too much slack in the chain. So you can already see the problem we're having here is that we have too much slop in the chain, and the tensioner's not going to take up that slop. So here I'm trying it again, trying to, after working the chain around a little bit, attempting to get the slop out of it. Now you can see I can't quite get the gear on because the camshaft is not precisely lined up with where I need to be to seat it with the chain in the tension position. As you can see, more slop. And we have to go basically one tooth over. Okay, we have still plenty of slop. We have tension on the top, which is not bad, but the problem we're having here is that instead of the slack being where the shoe will take it up, it's on the guide side of it, which is not good. So what we're trying to try and do here is rotate the chain around the sprocket to attempt to take out that extra slack. And you can see our wrench, on the camshaft we removed the locker tool, and we have a 24mm wrench on the camshaft to just slightly rock it to line it up so that we can get the other sprocket in place properly. And here I am just rocking it back and forth to see approximately where we're going to end up. I'm still trying to pull the extra slack over, try and get as much slack and slop out of it as I can before putting the intake cam gear on. Here we're putting on the intake cam gear. It's going to require a little bit of fiddling, moving the camshaft with the wrench slightly just to rock it. Uh-oh, I dropped it. I swear none of the valve gear was hurt while doing this. There, I'll insert the bolt to hold the cam gear in place. Now you'll notice that the slack is on the shoe side of it, so that the tensioner can come out and push against the chain and take up the slack. Okay, here I am tightening up the bolts, the shoe. These are 10mm. There's 3 of them. That top one there is a pivot. This is when I noticed that the bolt design is not great from the kit that we got. So this is the other side of the engine. We're going to put in our timing chain guide here. You'll notice it is the reverse of the front bank. So here I'm putting in the timing chain guide. You'll notice that this is the exact opposite of the front bank of the engine. So the timing chain guide is on top and the shoe is on the bottom. Again, this is just 2 10mm bolts that hold it in place. I seem to be having a problem threading it in. Here I'm about to put the timing chain shoe in place for the rear bank. And this is also a 10mm bolt that holds it in. Not really tightening anything up at this point. But here comes the chain. We'll slip that over the front gear on the intermediate shaft. Make sure everything's nicely in place. I'm tightening up the timing chain guide because I think it was loose. Basically here what I'm doing is I'm trying to get on the top side that's against the timing chain, I'm trying to get the least amount of slop in there as I can. So I'm going to try and run it over this timing gear and have it be as tight as possible. Now I'm putting the exhaust side cam gear on, test fitting it, trying to make sure I have the least amount of slack. And you'll see we will have to adjust the camshaft manually to get it fully in place. So we'll remove the locker tool and we'll put the 24mm wrench on the camshaft. So we're going to adjust it a little bit here. Too far. And we're testing for slop. Gonna thread the bolt in for the exhaust cam. Dough! As you can see, it slipped time. So here we are again trying to set the exhaust cam to the exact right spot, be able to slip the gear back over it. This is a somewhat tedious process. I'm sure if we did more of these, we'd get a lot better at it, but as you can see, we still have too much slack. I think we've got it at this point. Now we're going to put the bolt back in it. Right here we're just installing the timing chain tensioner. You'll notice that the exhaust cam tipped in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just adjust it. Here we are tightening up the timing chain guide. And then we'll just check the shoe real quick. We're going to torque up the bolts. It's 18 foot-pounds. Same torque for the tensioner. And that's the end of timing a Northstar. Okay, so now that we have our chain set, we have to put our tensioner in place. Now you'll notice that the default setting here is all the way out on these. There's a spring behind it that forces it out, and there is a ratchet mechanism here. So what we have to do to get this to compress, if you notice, you can't push it back in. And it's designed that way so the hydraulic pressure, once it's pushed it out past one of these clickers, one of these ratchet detents, so it can't go back. It can never go back once it's out. So what we have to do is push this in. You'll notice the ratchet comes out. We push that all the way in. We have to fight the oil tension until you have the opening here, and you insert any tool that goes through that hole, and there it is. It stays in place. There's still a bit of slop here, right? The second I pull this ball out of here, it'll tension it up. There we go. Perfect. Now you notice up here is nice and tight, but there's probably about one more click that has to come out of this. And once the oil pump fires up, the pressure will go into this and force this out as the chain begins to turn. And that'll get that extra click out of it. Okay, what I wanted to just show here is the actual wear on these chain tensioners. Earlier I may have mentioned that well, we're not sure whether we'd reuse these or not, but upon more better review of these chain tensioners, there is quite the lip. If you notice here, it catches my finger. It's pretty deep where the chain was running in these guides. So this piece is just made of Delrin. You'll note, like, this started out white. This right here is the it's not part of the tensioner, but it's a guide. And you'll notice that the white Delrin plastic is completely stained, basically the color of engine oil. But you'll see here that the deep grooves in this one, and then this is nice and smooth. So this will just keep our chain tension just a little bit better. It's actually interesting on the guide here, on both banks of the engine. On this guide, you'll notice that the outside groove is a lot less pronounced than the inside groove, and I'm wondering why that is. It probably has something to do with the angle that the chain comes off of the sprocket, but it's just interesting to note the wear pattern on this. Now, a lot of these chain tensioner kits come with bolts to use, but they seem to be a lot worse quality than the original GM bolts that are in there, and they're a different head size. This tensioner that I bought comes with a 13mm bolt, and it is just, this is the original factory bolt that I'm going to reuse because it's so much better. You'll notice the shoulder is nicely machined, and this flange edge is much better. This is one of the bolts they give you with the kit, and you notice how rough the flange edge is. The machining is not as good, and the bolt is, you can feel how it's lighter than this one. So even though the head size is smaller on this is a much better quality bolt. So I'm reusing these. I don't know why they even bother with this crap. But yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and continue setting up the timing on the other side and with these new tensioners. Alright, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna make sure the engine goes one complete revolution. I've put assembly lube on all the camshafts and rollers and everything in here just so we're not running anything dry. I'm going to just turn this over until our timing marks line back up again, and then we're going to check and make sure everything looks okay. Otherwise, if something's not quite working by the time we get all the way around, then we got to readjust, but we'll see what happens. Alright, there it is. The next thing we'll be doing is we'll be replacing this timing chain tensioner. We're doing this because while we're in there, we might as well replace these because they definitely got wear on them. So. Alright, so this, you can see here, the wear on this main tensioner is worse than any of the other chains in this the whole engine here. You can see how deep it is. But that's why we replaced this guy, because it's just totally carved out. Not quite all the way through yet, but it's getting there. So definitely when you're in one of these engines, if it's got over 100,000 miles on it, definitely change this thing. Because as you can see, it definitely eats through this one. Alright, so we need our socket, right? Okay, with the torque on it here, I'm going to set this to 0. Right, and we're going to tighten it and hope to God it doesn't snap. Okay, that's 35. So we're going to, again, tighten this up to 35 degrees. If you watch the pointer, turn this on there, right? The seal here on this case, it's not like super precise. We'll put it that way. There is a little bit of wiggle room that happens here. You can see the hole alignment. You know, we're located on the dowel pins here, but there's a little bit of slip in the actual seal. This is our oil filter adapter. Here's where your oil filter screws on. This is the pressure sensor, the 4-pin. This is the 4-pin model. And then I put these new O-rings on it here, so it just fits. Alright, so we're about to install our rear main seal here on our Northstar. And what we're doing is, how this seal actually works is this guy is pressed onto onto the crankshaft. And this outer black rubber is the actual seal. And it has channels in it, and it rides against the inside of this as that's the sealing surface. Okay, so there's two important things here. One is the seal, and two is the installation tool. Now this giant chunk of steel here is what you use to drive this over the end of the crankshaft and into this sealing area. So what happens is these 3 bolts tighten into the crankshaft here. Where your torque converter bolts go, and that allows you to put the seal on here like this, and then as you tighten up on this bolt, it drives the seal in. So what you're going to do, and the manual is very specific about not getting any oil on the inside lip of this seal. There you go. if you look here, we've got our all of our 3 mounting screws nicely tight, all 3 here. Here's the nut we're going to be turning, and you'll notice this is a little bearing block here that allows this to spin while you're turning it when it's under pressure. So as we tighten this, we may have to hold the engine and keep it from moving, but you can see the seal walking its way in there. There it goes. The oil's squeezing out all around it, but that's good, we want that. So go till it stops, right? Perfect. That's nicely even with the edge of the thing here. I don't see any variations. I mean, there's a ton of oil squeezing out, but there you go. Alright, so we're ready to put our flex plate on here. And this is where all of our little paint markings are very important because, as you can see, we've lined it all up. And when we put it actually on the crankshaft, when we put it on the actual crank, we have the additional markings right here that show us exactly where we need to line this up. Now I'm going to just put 2 bolts in here without, just to hold it where it is. I'm just going to use these to hold it in place. Now, it is very important to remember on a Northstar that the crankshaft, the bolts here are drilled through into the oil gallery that is under pressure when the oil pump is running. So you need to use thread sealant on every single one of these bolts is when you put it in, a generous amount of it, so that you don't have any leaks. Because if you don't do this, the next thing that happens is you're going to put it in the car and it's going to start leaking again, and then you got to take it back out. So nobody wants to do that. This is one of those jobs that nobody wants to do in the first place, let alone twice. This is probably too much. Alright, so what we're going to do now is torque these flywheel bolts to 11 foot-pounds. Oop, that one went tight. Alright. We're going to start at 0 and go to 50 degrees. Okay, we're going to call that good enough. Now we're putting on our harmonic balancer here. We made a series of 3 marks before, if you remember from the previous video. And that's our alignment for this, the harmonic balancer to the crankshaft here. Now we're going to use this tool. If you have an LS engine or you have an LT1 or something like that, you'll be pretty familiar with one of these for installing a crankshaft harmonic balancer. It's the same deal. This threads into the crank like so, and then this is again another bearing block like we saw on the other one, and it allows you to tighten this up. What I'm going to do first though is make sure this is nice and tight in there, so it doesn't move or cause any problems with the crankshaft while we're tightening this big nut on the outside. So give me 2 seconds and I'll get a wrench for that. So I'm just tightening this up till it doesn't have to be till it stops, but just have to get decent amount of threads in there. Because this is going to be quite the operation to press this thing in, so. Alright, that should be pretty good. Now, we turn this on here, like so. Alright, that snugs up. Now I gotta get a big giant wrench. Now, as you can see, we are slowly pressing this guy onto the crankshaft. Oh no. What happened?
Good.
Oh. The threads weren't right. They're not the right threads on this guy. So, I decided just to use the crank bolt to do this. Because I don't have the right tool. That's why. We're not all the way in there.
No.
So I guess I'm gonna have to use this to drive it in. I hate doing this, but forward into the breech. Yeah, that's good.
Alright, try it.
Okay, that worked. Alright, you ready? Here goes nothing. It's 80 degrees. Ready? I'm not fat enough for this.
Okay. You're pulling the entire engine down.
I just moved it though.
What are we at?
We're almost there.
Is it worth supporting the motor?
You want to put something underneath it, like a piece of wood?
No.
What?
I can't hold it. What are we at?
Probably only about 100, honestly. You ready? They only moved like 5 degrees.
Alright. Then we're gonna have to call this good.
So it goes back in the car. Well, we moved. I say we're about 110 degrees, I guess. Ready?
Yep.
1, 2, 3.
No.
Motor's moving. What we had to do here, since we disassembled the whole motor, and we lost our oil pump prime, what we're basically doing is filling the motor up with a shitload of oil to get the level of the oil up to the point where the pump is actually can actually like suck the oil up pretty easily. Because this Northstar oil pump apparently doesn't have the ability to on it. So what we did was, I think we put, oh god, I don't even know how many quarts of oil in here. And we can see the oil level now about midway up the crankshaft pulley, or the crankshaft here. So what we're going to do now is crank over the engine, and hopefully we'll get oil pressure. Nothing? Let's see what happens. Hey, we got pressure. Alright, finally primed.
Yep.
Everywhere. Alright.
Holding at 42.
Okay, the oil's pissing out everywhere now. Okay, so we're about to put the front valve cover back on. As you can see, we've got our new gaskets installed. We've got, these are for the spark plug holes, and this is for the center right there, for the coil pack that, it's just a rest really, it doesn't really do much else. But yeah, so the front valve cover's got the hole in it here for the pulley for the water pump. So it's a little bit tricky to get this on here. It's not as the back one is like just super easy. You have to kind of go at an angle here. So to get this on here, it's not like not rocket science, but it's not super easy. You have to basically tip this up so it goes over. Then you can sit this guy down on top. There are no dowel pins or any alignment stuff with this, so you basically just use the bolts as your. Those are not the right bolts, but you just use the bolts as the alignment. So you have to kind of put one in here, put one in here, put one in here, and put one in here. Make sure your alignment's good, and then you can put the rest of them in and tighten it down. Alright, so we're torquing these bolts up to 89 inch-pounds. These valve cover bolts are actually shouldered, so they go down and hit the bottom, but I think they give you a torque spec basically so you don't strip the very delicate hole out. Alright, there we go. Alright, now it's time for the rear valve cover. This one has no such hole in it, so it's very easy to install. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like a motor. Alright, so we're about to rejoin this lump with the transmission on the cradle over there. We're about to pick it up with the leveler here, and there's going to be much finagling while we attempt to get this guy mated back up with his with the 48E over there. Yeah, so let's get started. Gotta hope those bolts can hold this. Okay, so we're going to torque the main engine mount, front engine mount here to 55 foot-pounds. Alright, so we're going to be torquing the bell housing bolts to 55 foot-pounds. 3 of these bolts, are 18 millimeter, and this one down here, the short one, goes in here because the long ones will hit the exhaust crossover here, but that one's a 15 millimeter, so. Alright, not a lot of torque, you know. Yes. Alright, so that'll do it for this episode. Next episode, we're going to be putting all of the accessories back on, all the accessory drive stuff, power steering pump, alternator, AC compressor. Going to be just basically all of the stuff that has to get finished before we put the engine back in the car.
That's right. So do what you feel, keep both feet on the wheel. You don't have to go home, but you can definitely watch the next episode. So till next time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.